Now, I know a physicist who told me that they were tracking people in the lab by the electromagnetic frequency emitted by individuals' DNA. In other words, every living thing is an antenna that transmits and receives. We're an electrical system, and the DNA in every living thing has a unique frequency and signal. That is what they're using, what they're focusing on, and what they're weaponizing to completely control us. The DNA Human Genome Project was carried out at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where I was a staff scientist for 5 years. But the Lawrence Livermore Lab, Los Alamos National Lab, these are all nuclear weapons labs, were also involved. That means the military, because the nuclear weapons labs exist for the Pentagon, and the Pentagon exists for the oil companies. So the Human Genome Project was set up and well-funded to experiment and to research and to describe the human genome. Now, how would they use that? Well, what we know about Google is that they are doing DNA surveys from space. This would be NASA and the Navy. NASA is run by the Navy. They have been tracking and identifying isolated populations, for instance, in the Amazon, who have never had contact with Western people. These are villages of isolated people who are still living their traditional hunter-gatherer lives,
right?
And they've never seen a Westerner. That's not just humans. They are also doing a global species survey, and I've been tracking this for 2 years and noticed that many new species are being discovered, and it seems to be on a grid system. So they're doing a survey from space, and they went down the west coast of South America and then came up the east coast, and now they're in Southeast Asia. And if you watch in the news, about once a week they come up with a new article and photos on new species they've discovered. This is part of the United Nations Agenda 21 program, which is to identify all species and to do a complete global inventory of humans and animals. And what David Rockefeller has said about Agenda 21 is that in the end, we're going to have a chip on every person, and they will only be allowed to take out of the system what they put into it. If you work 12 hours a day, you're allowed to take 12 hours of something of value out of the system, but nothing more. What is going on? The J. Craig Venter Institute, which you sent me the article,
right,
has their mission as, quote, to forge new life forms, unquote. And they are also involved in manipulated computer code on DNA. What does this mean? Well, Dr. Helen Wallace from GeneWatch in 2002 said, we are in great danger, and she described this as a massive DNA database by the back door.
Now, what this does sociologically, it begins to set up a caste system here, which we already have, but this is a different way of doing it. I don't know where it's all going to go, but it's clearly hurtling forward at a pace that is pretty damn scary if you understand the potential of control here.
And what they're doing is using computing, medicine, technology, and the police state to converge into basically what is creating a totalitarian scientific oligarchy. And their purpose is to get this information and use it in discriminatory programs where the rich benefit and the poor are impacted negatively by these programs. And the second part of that agenda is the depopulation initiatives. Now, a really good...
Whoever that was.
So, as I was sitting there describing all of this to Dr. Parker, and I was talking about HARP, this is all integrated into the HARP system, I knew that Dr. Parker, when Parker was not his real name, I knew he was a CIA scientist. I knew he'd worked for the U.S. government, for the Department of Defense, for the World Health Organization, and the UN at different times. And I knew that he was a microbiologist who knew the whole field because he had to advise the government. And so I just said, Dr. Parker, what is the application of this discovery that nanoparticles are transmitters? And he caught his breath and he said, well, it's to redesign the human genome.
That's all, huh?
That's all.
They're going to create a new species, is what they're talking about here. Basically.
It's to create anything they want to.
That's right.
It's to repeat anything they want to. It's this totalitarian, insane scientific oligarchy that's run by psychopaths, and they think they can do anything they want to.
Well, so far nobody's around to stop them, unfortunately.
Now, what is transmitting and receiving that's around us? Well, how about cell phones in the megahertz frequency band? These are some abstracts that I'm going to just read the titles of. This is 1996. Single and double-strand DNA breaks in rat brain cells after acute exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic radiation. And they used the cell phone frequencies. DNA strand breaks in rat brain cells. So they're talking about sterility, about cancer, and about altering people's behavior. And the airport scanners are doing the same thing.
Wouldn't surprise me. I'm amazed that there's very little attention being paid to the electric grid.